Story 1, I was 23 when this happened, and even now, years later, I can't shake it. I had just graduated college and was drifting, trying to piece together some kind of life while figuring out what came next. I picked up whatever work I could, babysitting, running errands, cleaning houses. The kind of jobs where people pay you in folded up bills and say, "Thanks, hon." That's how I ended up meeting a man named Darren. A woman I sometimes babysat for passed my number along, saying Darren needed someone reliable to watch his dog while he was out of town. He called me himself, his voice friendly, but a little too enthusiastic, and explained that he'd be gone nearly a week. He didn't just want me to check in, he wanted me to actually stay overnight in the house. His German Shepherd Rex, apparently, got anxious if left alone. The money he offered made me hesitate for maybe half a second. It was more than I usually got for a whole week's worth of work. I said yes. When I first met him, nothing seemed immediately wrong. He was in his 50s, tall, with thinning hair and glasses that constantly slid down his nose. He wore a windbreaker, even though it wasn't cold. He talked too much, like he was trying hard to make me comfortable, but nothing felt off enough to raise alarms. His house sat near the woods, outside of town, tucked so far back on a gravel drive that you couldn't see it from the road. The house itself was dated beige carpet, faded curtains, a smell of air freshener trying to mask something. Underneath, he showed me where Rex's food was, how to work the TV, which doors to lock, even which fridge items I could eat. Then he pointed me toward the guest room, a small space off the den. "You'll be comfortable here," he said. I told myself this was just another job. The first 2 nights were uneventful. I watched old reruns on TV, walked Rex in the evenings, and fell asleep with him curled warm at my feet. The silence of the woods outside was thicker than what I was used to, but nothing felt wrong. The 3rd night, everything changed. I was lying on the guest bed, scrolling my phone, when something across the room caught my eye. On the dresser sat an alarm clock. At first glance, it looked ordinary, sleek, digital, glowing green numbers. But it didn't fit. Everything else in that room looked decades old, like it hadn't been touched since the 90s. The clock looked brand new. I stared at it longer than I should have. Above the numbers, I noticed a tiny black pinhole, perfectly round, a camera lens, pointed straight at the bed. My chest tightened. I picked it up, heart thudding. It was heavier than a normal clock, and when I held it close, I swore I could hear the faint hum of something running inside. I set it down quickly, trying to steady my breathing. That's when Rex, who'd been dozing by the door, suddenly lifted his head and let out a low whine. His ears pricked toward the hall, and then clear as day, I heard it. A door closing. Somewhere deeper in the house. Not the front. Not the back. Inside. My skin went cold. Darren wasn't supposed to return until Sunday. It was only Thursday night. I crept to the guest room door and locked it just as soft. Deliberate footsteps padded onto the carpet outside. Then came his voice. Darren's. Calm but uneven, like he'd been rushing. "Hey, I left something in there. Can you open up?" I didn't move. Another pause. Then his tone shifted. "That clock is just a motion sensor for the dog. I didn't tell you, because I didn't want you to freak out. That's all it is." I stood frozen, one hand pressed against my mouth. When I stayed silent, his knock grew harder, louder, rattling the thin door. "Open it. Come on. Let's talk like adults." Rex lunged at the door, barking furiously now, teeth bared at the crack beneath it. Darren's voice snapped, all friendliness gone. "Open the damn door. If you don't, I'll get my spare key. And I'll call the cops, tell them you broke into my house." My eyes darted to the window, low enough to climb through. Locked. My hands shook so badly, It took me 3 tries to get the latch open. Behind me, the pounding grew violent, and Darren's voice twisted into a scream. I shoved the window up, climbed out clumsily, and dropped hard onto the wet grass. Rex whined from inside, scratching at the glass, but he didn't follow. I bolted down the gravel driveway barefoot, my phone clenched in my fist. I called my dad, gasping, and told him to come now. By the time his headlights appeared, I was crouched behind a cluster of mailboxes, trembling so hard I thought I'd pass out. I never looked back toward the house. The next morning, I blocked Darren's number and called a lawyer. He explained what I already feared. Without the device in hand, without proof of recordings, there was little I could do. Darren could claim it was a harmless sensor. My word against his. I wanted to go back to take pictures, but my lawyer warned me not to. And truthfully, the thought of seeing Darren again made my skin crawl. I never got paid. The woman who referred me cut off contact completely. I don't know if she knew what kind of person he was, or if she just wanted to wash her hands of it. For months afterward, I barely slept. I found myself pulling down smoke detectors in my own apartment, checking picture frames, unplugging electronics. Anything that could hide a lens. But what still wakes me up some nights isn't the clock dot, it's that sound. That quiet door closing in a house I thought was empty, which means he wasn't. Just watching me through that fake alarm clock. He was already inside. Story 2. I booked the Airbnb in early October, just as the leaves were starting to turn red and gold. My girlfriend, Sarah, and I were planning a short getaway to visit her brother in a quiet mountain town about 4 hours from our apartment. I wanted something affordable but private, and the listing I found seemed perfect. The photos showed a charming old farmhouse, 2 stories, wide front, porch, rocking chairs, warm lamps glowing in the windows, hardwood floors, rustic kitchen, vintage furniture. It almost looked like something out of a country postcard. The reviews were all glowing, too. Guests called it cozy, peaceful, and authentic. The only odd detail buried at the bottom of the listing was a note. The seller is private storage and strictly off limits. I didn't think much of it at the time. Most hosts keep one area locked away for their own things. But the second we pulled up that Friday evening, I felt something wasn't right. The house looked more worn down than in the photos. The paint on the porch railings had chipped away, and the once white siding looked gray and tired. The trees around the property leaned in closer than I expected, their branches blotting out what little sunlight was left. There was only one other house in sight, a good distance away, and the narrow dirt road leading in gave me this strange sense of isolation. Like we'd stepped outside the world for a few days. Our host was already waiting for us. His name was Gerald. He was tall, but had a strange stoop to his shoulders, like he'd been carrying something heavy his whole life. Thin hair combed too neatly, plaid shirt tucked in tight, and a smile that felt stretched across his face like it didn't belong there. When he shook my hand, his grip lingered just a beat too long. His eyes flicked between Sarah and me in a way that made my skin crawl, though his tone stayed perfectly polite as he offered to show us around. The inside smelled faintly of dust, mixed with something sweeter, almost like melted wax or cheap cologne. The living room had an old sagging couch facing a boxy TV, and the kitchen looked dated but clean. Upstairs, the single bedroom had a queen bed under a ceiling fan and a dresser with a slightly cracked mirror, but it was when we came back downstairs that Gerald stopped at a heavy wooden door near the kitchen. A thick iron lock hung on it, and he tapped it with his knuckles like he was making a point. "This stays locked," he said, his tone suddenly sharper. "That's my cellar. Nothing down there you need to worry about." No smile this time. Just a flat, hard look before moving on to show us where the extra towels were. Then he wished us a pleasant stay, stepped out onto the porch, and drove away. For the first hour, Sarah and I unpacked, made tea, and tried to settle in. Sitting outside, listening to the crickets, it almost felt normal. But when we climbed into bed, the silence hit me harder than I expected. No cars, no voices, not even wind through the trees. Just heavy, suffocating quiet, somewhere after midnight. I heard it, a faint, dull thump from below us. I froze, listening. Nothing followed. I told myself it was just the old house shifting, and after a while, I drifted back to sleep. The next day, we spent in town breakfast at a diner, walking the main street, visiting Sarah's brother. By the time we got back, it was dark again. We cooked pasta, watched part of a movie, and went to bed. But around 2 a.m., I woke up needing to use the bathroom. On my way back up the stairs, I froze. From the cellar came a sound dragging. Something heavy being pulled slowly across the pillow. It went on for 10 seconds, stopped, then started again. Every hair on my body stood on end. For a second, I thought maybe Gerald had come back, but he told us he wouldn't be around. And why would he be down there in the middle of the night? Without a car in the driveway? I stood there, heart pounding, until the noise stopped. I crept into the bedroom and whispered to Sarah, asking if she'd heard it. Her eyes were wide open in the dark. She had. We stayed awake another half hour, listening. But the sound didn't return. The third night was worse. We'd gone hiking that day and were exhausted. But not long after lying down, the noises started again. Not dragging this time. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, pausing between sets. 4 or 5 steps. Silence. 3 more. Silence. It sounded like someone pacing the basement floor directly beneath. Pausing often, almost like they were listening for something. Sarah whispered that she thought she heard breathing between the steps. I didn't want to move, didn't want to draw attention. So we just lay there, stiff as boards, staring at the ceiling until morning light seeped in. By then, I couldn't take it anymore. During the day, I checked the cellar door. Still locked. But when I pressed my nose closer, I caught a faint whiff of something sour and rotten under the smell of damp wood. I backed away quickly, heart racing. That night, the sounds began earlier, just past midnight. First, a metallic clink-clink, like tools being tapped together. Then the footsteps again. This time, they lasted nearly an hour. Sarah barely spoke to me. She was pale and tense, and when she did finally say something, it was a question that made my blood run cold. Does the smoke detector above the bed look wrong to you? I hadn't noticed before. But when I stood on the bed and looked closer, I saw it. A tiny black dot in the middle, shiny, perfectly round. Dread hit me instantly. I grabbed a chair, unscrewed the device, and inside was a small, hidden camera, its light blinking faintly. Sarah sat frozen on the bed as I tore through the room. Finding another tiny lens poking out through a hole near the dresser mirror, came directly at us. That was it. We didn't pack carefully, didn't fold. We just shoved everything into our bags and bolted out of the house. At the nearest gas station, we called the police. 2 officers met us there, and when we explained about the noises, the cameras, and the locked cellar, they followed us back. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the cops collected the cameras, cords, and what looked like hidden receivers tucked behind furniture. They asked us to show them the locked cellar door, but this time it wasn't locked. The door stood wide open. The officers exchanged a look, then went down with flashlights. We waited at the top, tense, until raised voices erupted below. A moment later, one of them shouted for us to come down. When we did, My stomach lurched. In the cellar, crouched inside a makeshift closet, was Gerald the host. Beside him was a monitor wired to multiple feeds, almost certainly from the cameras in the house. There were also coils of extension cords, recording equipment, and what looked like old memory cards stacked in a box. He hadn't left at all. He'd been living down there the entire time. The police cuffed him on the spot. He was later charged with trespassing, unlawful surveillance, and invasion of privacy. We didn't have to testify in court. Our statements were enough. Airbnb reached out quietly, offering us a voucher that felt more like hush money than compensation. But the damage was already done. Sarah and I don't trust Airbnbs anymore. We stick to hotels, and even then I still find myself checking every smoke detector, every mirror, every dark corner of the room before I let myself sleep. Because every time I close my eyes, I hear it again, that dragging sound from beneath our feet, and I know he was waiting. Story 3. My name's Daniel, and what I'm about to tell you happened less than 2 weeks ago. I live in a small 3-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a dull beige building. It smells faintly of old carpet and cigarette smoke. One of the rooms is mine. One belongs to a guy named Mason, my roommate, and the last is basically just storage. Met Mason through a rental website. He was already living there and needed someone to split the rent. At first glance, he seemed like the type of guy you'd forget 2 minutes after meeting. Average build, glasses, short hair, kind of soft-spoken. The kind of roommate you think will be perfect because they don't seem like trouble. I wasn't looking for a drinking buddy or a best friend, just someone steady, someone who wouldn't disappear on rent day. The first few months passed without issue. Mason worked nights at some distribution center on the edge of the city, while I worked mornings at an auto shop. Our paths almost never crossed. If I was heading out, his door was usually shut tight, blinds drawn. By the time I got home, he was already gone. We might bump into each other once in a while in the kitchen. Small talk about groceries or bills. Nothing personal. Honestly, I liked it that way. But then, little things started catching my attention. One evening, I came home from grabbing dinner with a friend and noticed my closet door was half open. That might not sound like much, but I always keep it closed. The sight of my jackets leaning out into the dim room gave me this strange, unsettled feeling. I shrugged it off, figured I must have left at a rush that morning. A week later, I walked in to see my desk chair angled oddly toward my bed. I hadn't touched it. Again, I brushed it off, but my stomach was tight in a way I couldn't explain. And came the discovery that changed everything. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was deep cleaning my room, moving stuff around, dusting, wiping down the windows. That's when I spotted it, something tiny in the corner where the ceiling met the wall. At first, I thought it was just a screw, or maybe a tack someone had left behind. But when I dragged a chair over and leaned in close, my breath caught out. It was a camera. A small wireless camera, pointed directly at my bed. I remember just standing there with it in my hand, my fingers trembling. It wasn't hidden behind a vent or anything. It was literally stuck with a bit of cheap adhesive, like someone didn't even care if I found it. The slot for a memory card was empty, which made me feel even sicker. How many cards had already been swapped out? How much had already been recorded? There was only one explanation. Mason. He was the only other person with access to my room. That day, he wasn't home. His bedroom door was shut, and the apartment was still. My chest thudded as I stared at his door, debating. I told myself not to do it, but curiosity won. I twisted his doorknob slowly and stepped inside. The smell hit me. First stale food and sour laundry. His blinds were clamped shut, making the room darker than it should have been in the middle of the day. His bed was unmade, sheets twisted, and his desk was buried under unopened mail, coins, receipts. I scanned around for anything: laptops, hard drives, memory cards. Nothing obvious. Just a messy room that told me nothing. I closed the door and went back to my room, but the unease wouldn't leave me. That night, I decided to test him. I tucked the little camera deep into my nightstand drawer under some socks. My plan was simple. If Mason came looking for it, I'd know the truth. 2 nights, nothing happened. I started to wonder if I'd misjudged him, if maybe the camera had been left by some old tenant. But then came the 3rd night. I woke up suddenly at around 3 a.m. at first. I didn't know why, but then I heard the faint scrape of wood against wood. My nightstand drawer. Keeping my breathing even, I cracked my eyes open. In the gray light leaking through the blinds, I saw him. Mason. He was in my room, bent over my nightstand, his pale fingers rummaging through the drawer where I'd hidden the camera. My heart pounded so loud, I thought it would give me away. I lay still, frozen, trying to convince myself I was dreaming. But then he stopped moving. His whole body went rigid. Slowly, mechanically, his head turned toward me. His eyes locked on mine. And in a voice so calm it made my skin crawl, he said, "I know you're awake." Ice shot through me. My throat was dry, but I forced myself upright, adrenaline flooding in. "Why the hell did you put a camera in my room?" I snapped. For a second, he just stared. Then he said it was because he thought I'd been stealing. From him. Stealing. I laughed bitterly, half in shock, half in rage. "You aimed it at my bed," I told him. "That's not about stealing. That's disgusting." His face twitched. He muttered something about proof. I told him he was lying, that I wasn't stupid, and that I'd go to the landlord, and maybe even the cops. My voice was shaking, my hands balled into fists, but I didn't back down. Finally, I yanked the camera from the drawer and held it up between us. "This is all the proof I need," I said. Then I stormed into the kitchen, threw the camera into the trash as hard as I could,